So who am I? I'm Rebecca Hogue. I'm a lecturer at UMass Boston, and I'm also a member of Treehouse Village Eco Housing. And so this presentation about sociocracy and intentional community comes largely out of my experience with living in, helping create and living in a co-housing community. People will often ask, what co-housing is. So I'll give you sort of the short version of it. It is an intentional community, which means that everybody that comes to live in co-housing comes here with the intention of being a member of a community. We all live in our own condominiums. We have our own full spaces. It's not a commune. And it's not, but it's not a co-op either. So the idea is that everybody, participates in the gardening work or snow shoveling, we're in Canada, or whatever. And we also share meals, share some meals. So we're looking at doing 2 meals a week that you can opt into. So you can choose to join the community for meals, and you can choose to cook for the community. And so it's very much an intentional community where people get, there's no hard and fast rules that say how you have to participate, but everybody comes with the intention of participating. So my background in this presentation, so just like democracy is practiced in very different ways in every country, sociocracy, which is also known as dynamic governance, is practiced slightly differently based upon the organizations that are sort of sponsoring it. And so my background comes from SOFA, so it's Sociocracy for All. If you can get them on the website, sociocracyforall.org. And so that's the way in which I practice sociocracy has been based upon their definition of it. Sociocracy is bigger than so it includes both how to have meetings and how to make decisions. So we think about democracy, we might think of voting as how we make decisions, but we use Robert's rules for how we run our meetings. Sociocracy actually includes both. They're sort of brought in together. And in the sort of, I'll actually jump over to my little homework thing because sort of the principles of sociocracy are really about, equivalence of voice and distributed leadership, seeking the win-win. It really aligns a lot with the ethos of Equity Unbound, and the idea that everybody has a voice, and it sets structures to make it possible for everybody to have a voice in things. So in the next 60 minutes, I actually structured this presentation like a meeting. So we're going to do sort of things that we would normally do in our meetings. And so we'll start with, I'll talk a little bit about intentional community, but then we'll do a breakout where we're going to do a check-in, where we'll practice actually checking in with each other. If this group remains small, we'll do it in the larger group. And we can just have people choose whether they want to opt in or out. And actually what I might do is ask Danny or Nadine to be sort of the facilitator in that aspect and be the person who sort of calls on each person one at a time when we do our rounds. If we're not in breakouts. If we're in breakouts, it's sort of slightly differently. I'll talk a little bit about structure and how we organize ourselves in circles. And then I'll talk a little bit about consent decision-making and evaluation, because one of the key aspects of sociocracy is evaluation is built right into it. And we evaluate everything we do. So when we make a decision, we also have a plan to evaluate that decision down the line. And so it's sort of a built-in structure that way, which aligns really nicely with us educators who love to evaluate and almost never get a chance to do it properly. it's actually built right into the structure. So talking a bit about intentional community. Intentional community, the definition by the Foundation for Intentional Community is an intentional group of people who have chosen to live together or share resources on the basis of common values. And I'll comment that that or is important, because you can have an intentional community where you're not living together, right? We just happen to be in a situation where we live together. And it's fascinating. It's like, I'll share sort of one little thing. Like if I'm cooking and I realize I ran out of lemons, I can like send a message to my chat and say, anyone have a lemon? And my neighbors will almost compete to see who can get there first with the lemon. It's almost like a competition. Who can help the next person the fastest? And so it's just wonderful to be in that sharing of resource model as well, of we have our own things, but we also intentionally share things, so we don't have to buy 8 lawnmowers or whatever. We can share these things. Learning communities in some ways are intentional communities, or can be intentional communities. They don't necessarily, they're not always built that way, but we often strive for that. Like, so those of us that teach in the online classroom, we're often trying to build an online community, a learning community in our classroom. And that in essence is a form of intentional community where we come together with a shared goal of learning. So that's a little bit about what intentional community is. And sociocracy is a way to organize and make up decisions within a group. It's a whole governance system. So there's a whole lot more to it than what I'm going to talk about. People spend years studying it sometimes. We've been doing it for a long time here, so I'm quite familiar with it. Sociocracy for All has books like this one, which, there we go, Many Voices, One Song, which is sort of like the book that actually goes through all of the processes and stuff like that. It's one of their older books. They've got a few newer ones out now, which is good. One of my favorites is Who Decides Who Decides. I just for the title. Who decides who decides. So one of the key principles of sociocracy is that we speak in rounds, allowing everyone to contribute, and taking the time to hear everyone's voice. So that whole idea of, and it's interesting being online versus being face-to-face, because now we have our meetings face-to-face. When we were online, our rounds could be random, right? The facilitator could call an order and we would have a different order each time of who's speaking. Face-to-face, you naturally fall into the going literally in a circle around the room. So you're speaking in the same order, but we might call on a different person to start that round each time. And the idea is everybody gets a chance to talk. Everybody gets a chance to say something before there's any reaction to it. So we are just listening when we are not speaking. And that's actually really important. It's actually one of the principles I introduce to my students when they are looking at doing online group work. And it's one of the principles that my students use the most is the idea of talking around so that everybody gets a chance to contribute. And that it really helps the people that are more introverted, or maybe more shy to speak, because you actually get to hear their voices. And often what they're bringing to the table is very reflective and very valuable to the whole process. And so it's a very effective way to get everyone to participate. Another principle is that we start all of our meetings with a check-in. And the way that it's explained is it brings the human into the room, right? We all come into the space with something, right? With, something else going on in our lives. And we come into the space to be into the meeting. But that coming in and that something else is actually really important for us to do when we first come in. So we often will ask the question, how are you coming into the meeting? And this is where we find out things like, well, somebody is having a health crisis, or somebody is having a great day, right? It's okay for somebody to have a great day and somebody else not to have a great day, right? Like all feelings are valid in that check-in, but it's really important because when you get to that decision-making phase later, it's an important aspect of building trust. And when you get to that decision-making, it can help you understand better what people are saying, because they're saying it as somebody with a background, emotional state as well. So the first activity, and as I mentioned, I was originally going to do this in breakouts, but I don't think we have enough people. It would be like one breakout, because the breakouts would be 4 to 7 people, or 4 to 6 people, and it would be one breakout, which doesn't make any sense. So we'll do a check-in round, and I asked Nadine if she would manage the sort of facilitation aspect. And if anybody does not want to participate, just text or let Nadine know, and she can then take you off the rounds when we do the rounds. So in small groups, we'll do a round. So we'll do this. We'll start now. How are you coming into the workshop? And I'm going to ask a random question that will come up a little bit later in the workshop. I apparently was hungry when I was writing these slides, because there's a lot of food as a theme. So the other question is, what's your favorite food? And I will pass it over to Nadine to facilitate the check-in round.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to remove Veronica, and I've just sent an order that we can follow for this check-in and for these rounds. And so it would help us kind of keep us all in that space. So we can get started with our order here. Eva, would you like to go ahead? Should we do, Rebecca, should we do one question first round and then the food question round, or are we answering both questions in the same time?
Do both at the same time, please, and maybe add in where in the world you're coming from.
All right. So my name is Eva. I'm from Germany, and I'm coming into the workshop excited and also a bit intimidated, because it's my second workshop from MYFest. I had a long vacation in between, and I'm not sure if my English is good enough to communicate on this level of, but I'm excited, also a bit tired, because I had a long counseling session before this workshop. Okay, and my favorite food, I would say, typical for German, something with potatoes. Yeah.
Thank you, Eva. Maha, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. So how am I coming into the workshop? Missing Rebecca, I think, because Rebecca and I used to be partners. We co-founded Virtually Connecting Together. So I'm here because I miss her more than anything, and I've been wanting this workshop for a long time. What's my favorite food? My own ginger or cinnamon cookies, honestly, the ones that I make. And was that like where I am in the world? I'm in Cairo, Egypt.
Thank you, Maha. All right, we're going with Shahinaz next. Shahinaz, would you be able to participate? I'm not sure if you can hear us. Okay, until we get Shahinaz back, let's go further to Danny.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I am coming into the workshop very curious about the idea of sociocracy and how it applies. I facilitate a lot of meetings, so I'm very excited about all the ideas so far, Rebecca. My favorite food changes depending on my mood. So right now I'm really enjoying a lot of like tacos, kind of Mexican food, because it's ridiculously hot where I am. And where I am is in London, Ontario, Canada, where we are experiencing climate change to the extreme. So our days are significantly hotter than they normally are. But I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you, Danny. Now it's my turn. I am coming in to the workshop from Cairo, Egypt, from my apartment. I'm coming into the workshop feeling calm. I just finished preparing for my meditation session that's happening a couple of hours after this one. So I'm feeling the calmness that came out when I was preparing, and I'm also very excited to be engaging in this workshop with everybody and with Rebecca. My favorite food, also like Danny, it really depends on my mood, and the phase where I am in my life, and I'm in the phase where I'm trying to be a little healthier. So I'm really embracing the different kinds of vegetables and salad, and I'm really actually, and fruits, and I'm enjoying it. And also, I don't know if anybody knows this, but summer fruits in Egypt tend to be incredible. So I'm really enjoying those in the moment, especially mangoes. Thank you. Rebecca, now's your turn.
Oh,
Oh, Shaynez, yay, great, go ahead. We were wondering where you were because we put you in the round before Danny, but now that you're here, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, I'm Shaynaz. I'm now in Vienna, but I'm going back by the end of this month to Cairo. And I came here for this. I'm attending most of the MYFest lectures, and I do like to know about this topic. Therefore, I'm here. And my favorite food is maybe this grapes.
Thank you, Shaynez. Great. Over to you, Rebecca.
yeah. And I'm going to apologize for not stopping sharing. If you can remind me next time so that everybody, I have both screens up so I can actually see everybody when I'm talking, but I forget that when I do that, I knock everybody out. So yeah, if you could remind me, that would be great. I'm coming in, a little nervous. I haven't done a presentation in a year. I've been off for the last year for medical reasons. I am, yeah, but I'm coming in well. I'm really happy to see you guys. I'll apologize to Eva right away. I talk fast, and I'll try and slow down a little bit, but I do tend to talk fast. And actually, it's not just Eva, it's probably everyone else whose English isn't their first language. Yeah, how am I coming in and what's my favorite food? I'm going to say at this time of year, berries, right? We are in the prime of berry season. So just like Nadine is into mango season, we're into berries, and our berries change slightly. So the raspberries are going out, the blueberries are in, and the blackberries are about to start. So in the northern climates, berries are a big thing. That's the fruit that grows wild everywhere. Right. So like blueberries, for example, when I go on a hiking trail, there are blueberries everywhere, which is lots of fun. Okay, so we've checked in and we've learned a little bit about each other in the process. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we organize ourselves structurally. First of all, we call them circles. The idea is the lack of hierarchy, right? So we're trying to sort of break the concept of hierarchy. And so I'll show you. So the picture here shows sort of how information flows between circles. We have a centralized circle that's called the coordinating circle. They actually don't make decisions. That's not quite true. The only decision the centralized circle makes is what decisions other circles get to make. So their job is to say, oh, somebody has to, have ownership over how the gardens work. And so we're going to assign that to this circle. And so their job is to assign decision-making authority to other circles. And so they come together to make sure there's no gaps in the community or in the organization. So everybody gets to decide. The information comes back to the main coordinating circle, and they get to make sure that there are no gaps. Or overlaps. So you don't have two circles trying to make the same decision, because that's a problem too. So gaps and overlaps are what they're looking for, but they are not they look like they're the center of things, but it's not a hierarchy. And generally what happens is we try to push decisions to the furthest edges of the community, because the narrower the circle, so we call this a broader circle. There used to be some language where there was a parent circle and a child circle or whatever. Again, that applies hierarchy. So we're going with the broader circle just because its authority is broader. it may be the organization as a whole is sort of their authority, but they don't make any of the operational decisions. All of those get pushed off to narrower circles. And the idea is a narrower circle will then have expertise in something. And so the idea is that you push the decision-making over to the people that have the best ability to make those decisions. Those are the people that, like, they're going to focus on this area. So they're the ones that make the decisions in that area, because they're the ones, like we have a finance circle. They're the ones that take care of the finances for the community. And they make a whole bunch of decisions about how the community's finances work, because they're the ones that understand it the best. And they're the ones that, like, they specialize in that thing. So the idea is each circle has a specialization, and the narrower you get, the more specific they get, and each circle gets to decide on certain things. So every circle, we have what's called an aim, which is what they're trying to do, and a domain, which is the area in which they can make decisions. They have autonomous authority to make those decisions. And that's sort of how we delegate out decision-making within the organization. Within the organization, to help with communication, we have what's called a double link. And what that is there are two members of each circle that attend the broader circle. So they're the leader and the delegate of the circle, of a given circle, will attend as full members the broader circle as well. So they'll both be, I don't know if you can see my mouse. Can you see my mouse move? Okay, so they'll be the leader and delegate here, will also be members here. And the leader brings information down and the delegate brings information up. And so when you go to the broader circle meeting and you're reporting, it's actually the delegate that does the reporting, not the leader. And so it sort of helps balance the perspective that's coming out of any given circle, so that you're not, again, trying to break down those barriers. And so within a circle, I'll jump on to the next one. We have a leader. The leader is really focused on the future and the priority of the circle. They're the one that creates the agenda, right? Somebody has to call the meeting. Somebody has to create the agenda. That is the leader of the circle. In some organizations, the thing about sociocracy is you can rename anything you want as long as you all agree with it. So in some organizations, they'll call the leader the coordinator instead of the leader. Again, trying to break down that sense of hierarchy. The facilitator runs the meeting. And if you look at power dynamics within a circle, the facilitator actually has more power than the leader does, because there are many places where the facilitator is the one that builds the proposal, not the leader. It's kind of an interesting thing, but the leader and the facilitator work closely together to make meetings run smoothly. We have a secretary or admin that keeps minutes and focuses on the history. So you have the leader looking at the future, the facilitator looking at the current, and the secretary looking at the history and holding the organizational history of the circle. And then the delegate represents the circle to the broader circle. So they're the circle representative. And so those are the typical roles. In our organization, we actually broke out the secretary role into two roles. We call them, we didn't like the term secretary for one thing. It's just got too many connotations to it. And so we have a scribe, who's the person who takes notes. And then we have an admin, who's the person who manages all of our files and everything associated with it. And like, for example, the admin will be actually, the leader will set the time and place for the meeting, but the admin will actually do the booking system, right? So we try and divide up the work that's involved in having meetings, so that it's not all one person doing all of it. Some ideas of how we might use this in our organizational structure, and this is sort of an interesting one. I introduce the key concepts to students before they go into group work, and it helps them learn to speak in rounds. And it also helps them organize their structure of their teams. And it helps them sort of, they don't have to take any of this, but giving them this gives them tools. in particular because I teach online, and most of my students, although they're mid-career professionals, may not ever have been in an online group before. And so learning how to be a group in that context is quite different. And these are just some tools, but these tools also work really well face-to-face because they help prevent one student from dominating a project in group work and that kind of thing. So introducing the key concepts to students. I could see organizational structure, but boy, would that be hard to work with in a university, which is so hierarchical, right? Universities are so built upon hierarchy, right? It's all about, you know, the sort of the levels and the prestige or whatever. So it would have to be a very forward-thinking department to be willing to try and work with this. There is a case study that was done about a large research project in Hawaii, where they used sociocracy in their research, because their research, it was a community research project. So it involved a lot of community groups and working with a lot of Native Hawaiians in the groups. And so they introduced sociocracy as a way to help the participants as well integrate into the research project. And so there's a case study about it. They're about a year into their sociocracy experiment. I also know somebody who actually runs a school in Madagascar, and she uses sociocracy. She's introduced sociocracy to help them so that they're not relying upon her to make the decisions, but rather to help empower people. Because that's the other thing that happens with this. By putting the decision authority out to the narrower circles, you're actually empowering people to make decisions, right? People are often afraid to make that decision because they don't think they have the authority to. And this empowers them and really helps empower people to, take on doing something and actually making that. That's cool, Eva. Eva just shared something in the group about a journalistic group, route reporter, by close, which has been working in a similar way. Exactly. It's sometimes called dynamic governance, and so you may not have heard of it as sociocracy, but sociocracy is one of the models that does it, and it's really quite useful. I can see it useful in our organizations, but I also see aspects of it really useful for group work. So circle structure and circle roles are completely flexible as long as everyone agrees. And so that's part of the interesting aspect of it. So we have to, come up with a proposal for how this is going to work. And then we have to make the decision. And that decision making is done in a different ways. And I'm going to jump over a little bit of my presentation and come back to it looking at the time. I'll talk a little bit about the selection process, but I think what we're going to do is I'm going to jump over. I want to get to the actual way we make decisions and sort of practice making a decision. Great question, Maha. I'm not very good at following the chat, by the way, so if I miss something, let me know. Does each person belong to just one circle or multiple? Well, any leader or delegate belongs to two circles automatically. They belong to their circle and they belong to the broader circle. But people can belong to as many circles as they want. We also have a different concept called an operational role, where an individual holds the role, and that's for operationalizing things. Like, we may have somebody who's responsible for answering email. That's not a circle thing, that's an individual thing. So we will give them an operational role, and we'll define, and we'll give them, we'll give them specific areas of responsibility and areas where they're allowed to make decisions on their own, where they don't have to keep coming back to the circle to make the decisions. And so the idea is all of these things there's a fair bit of paperwork in defining them, but it gets well defined and then handed over. And that worked actually really well when we were hiring people within our organization, because we have the concept of operational roles. We could actually create a job description that is an operational role and then hire somebody into it, and it just integrates into our otherwise all volunteer organization in a natural way. So it's a really flexible way for that kind of stuff to work. But the structure is completely flexible as long as everybody agrees. And we can rename things. Like, so Sociocracy, they have a general circle and a mission circle. We have a coordinating circle. Like, we can redefine things. When we had parent and child circles, we redefined them, or we had circles and subcircles, and now we talk about broader circles. So we play with the language a little bit to try and help with the equity aspect of it. Selection process. This is an interesting one. So when we want to get people to take on roles, we go through a selection process. And it is different than what you are used to. We generally try to avoid volunteers directly into a role. Rather, we help lift each other up, and we help people. We go through a process that allows us to, you would not, in essence, nominate people for each of the roles, and you're allowed to self-nominate. So you can nominate yourself because that brings useful information to the table, but you would also can nominate other people into different roles based upon their expertise. And this has been very helpful because people will often not want to step into roles. They'll be afraid to step into roles, but everyone else in the room, when they say, we had a member who never saw herself as a leader. And we all lifted her up and said, we think you'd be a great leader. You're organized, you have this skill, this skill, this skill. And so by going through the process, she never would have self-nominated, but we went through a process that had each of us explain why we thought she would be great at it, which helped her accept taking it. And so she took it on for a short period of time at first, but then worked into that role. And so it does help people develop into roles that they otherwise may not have been willing to take on through a process of again, so volunteering is generally not the way we decide things. I have a document. This is the part that I'm going to with a small group. Okay, let's do this. I wasn't going to do this, but I think we should do this. The document actually, I'm going to share it with you here, and then I'm going to open it in my window. I just shared it with Danny. Sorry, Danny, if you can share it out. And I'll open it where I'm sharing it here. It actually, that's not the right, that's just the selection grid. I need the other part. There's two parts to this. There is the process description. We have created all of these wonderful templates in our organization to make these processes run very smoothly. And so one of the things we do is we actually step into each of the decision-making processes very clearly with our agendas actually have it in and actually tell the facilitator what to say. So we remind everyone, we start with the base role descriptions, right? When you're trying to ask somebody to take on a role, the first thing you have to have is a description of what that role is and what their responsibilities are. Because otherwise you wouldn't know that. And then, so we all agree to that and what those are. And then we go, and so we understand and describe, that's the first step. And then we make nominations. And when we make our nomination and we do our nomination round, there's specific things that are reminders, and we ask the facilitator to read these out loud. And so are you up for that, Nadine? Do you want to give this a try? And sorry, I voluntold you, which instead of selecting, but if you're.
So do you want us to go through, or do you want me to go through the document kind of roles with everybody?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about what the best way to do this is. Because I also changed the decision, right? So Sorry, not meaning to be wishy-washy on this one. I think what I'm going to do with this, though, is leave this as a resource for people to look at. And I'll just talk you through it a little bit. And then we'll go on to the decision-making, and we'll do the decision-making as a group, because I think the decision-making part is actually the more useful aspect of it. But as a group, when we do our role selections, we remind people that no one person will fill the role perfectly. We're looking for somebody who will do the work well, but understanding that no one single nominee will have all of the qualifications. Self-nominations are encouraged because they bring important information to the process. The goal is to have someone that can do the work well, not perfectly. When we found that we were falling into talking about how a candidate could make up for their lack of qualification. And so we said, don't do that. Only to speak to the important part, like the important part of that, of what they can do. And when giving a rationale. So when you do your nomination, you have to explain why you nominated that person. And we remind people to use inclusive, non-discriminatory language. One of our issues with in our community was ageism, right? We would say, oh, well, this would be a great person because they're in group A or group B, like age-wise. And it was related to how our community was built to be an intergenerational community. But we try not to use that as a way to justify somebody into a position. But also consider diversity and balance amongst all your nominations. So if you're nominating 4 people or 3 people, you want to try and balance them out. So usually we nominate what we call a slate. So you'll nominate all 3 or all 4 roles at the same time to try and balance out. And if you are nominated, you're asked not to object until the appropriate time in the process. So wait until you get to the very end before you actually object. And in part because people would actually knee-jerk reject a position before they had a chance to hear why people want them in that position. And so the process then goes on to a nomination round, and we use a little grid here. We have a grid sheet. Did I put the right one up? Where each member, and we do this because we were doing it online, we would have each member's name in one row, and then we'd wait till everybody had their mouse in the right place, and everyone would type in their nomination at the same time so that they weren't changing their nomination based upon what someone else said in the first round. And then you go through and you do a round and explain why you nominated that person. And then there's a second round where you get a chance to change your mind. Because in some cases, you nominated somebody, but somebody else nominated themselves, and you then change your mind and say, okay, they would be great. Or you hear other people's reasons, and the other people's reasons convince you, and you end up changing your mind. But the goal, even on the change round, is you're not looking for consensus. You're just looking for everybody's opinion and to get it out there. And then the facilitator has the fun job of, and sometimes the facilitator and the leader will go off in a breakout room and come up with a proposal and say, okay, I propose this slate. And their goal is to come up with something that everybody will agree with. Knowing, again, that no decision is perfect. And we have a little thing, and I'll go back to my slides and talk about decisions, because this is where we get into the decision process. So that's the selection process. And then we go into the consent decision-making. And I want to explain consent. The idea of consent is more about not having an objection. And so if you think about voting and voting is very anti-sociocracy. Every time somebody says we should have a vote about it. Well, vote is majority rules, right? And it means that a minority of the people don't have a voice in the world, right? Consensus is this other thing where everybody has to agree. And as the group gets larger, you end up with, the term is often used, tyranny of the minority, because one person can break a decision in that. What we strive for is no objections, and we're looking for a preference or within range of tolerance. So you'll often hear people on a proposal say, you know, it's not my preference, but it's within my range of tolerance. So it's good enough. We also use another term called good enough for now, safe enough to try. You'll hear those a lot because we evaluate a lot. So sometimes we can say, I'm not so sure about that decision, but I think it's good enough for now. Let's reevaluate it in 3 months. And it allows us to move forward with things so we don't get stifled with indecision in our thing. So that's a key part of the decision making is that it's consent-based, not consensus-based, and not majority rules, not voting. And so there's a process to get there because there's always processes. Sociocracy is full of processes. Another key thing is objections. An objection is considered a good thing in the decision-making process because an objection means it's outside your range of tolerance, but it also brings new information to the table and it helps us make better decisions. However, objections need to be grounded in the aim of the circle, not the personal preference. So you can't object because you don't like that person, but you can object because for some reason or another, you think they can't do the job. Or that's a person, or if the decision is about, and I'm going to throw something out there because we're going to practice the decision that I expect there to be lots of objections. And that is like, you're trying to make a decision about what to have for lunch. Yes, I'm talking about food again. And I expect there to be objections because I very intentionally picked something that people can't eat. And so the idea is that the objection brings new information and then you modify the proposal until you can get to a point that you have a proposal that has no longer has objections. There are 2 ways to get around objections. There's modifying the proposal, which I just spoke to, or shortening the term. So maybe make the decision for 1 meal instead of for 6 meals or whatever. Make the decision a shorter time, try it, and then evaluate it and move on. So that's how we sort of go with it. The process we use is, first of all, somebody states a proposal. So the proposal gets stated. And then we ask clarifying questions. And we do a round and say, does anybody have any questions about this proposal? Do you understand the proposal itself? This is not a round for opinions. This is just, do you understand the proposal? Then there's a reactions round where everybody gets to react to the proposal. And this is where you get to provide your opinion. And then there's a call for consent. And often during the reactions round, the proposal gets rewritten and edited and modified. And you end up going back to the, okay, does everyone understand the proposal? So we might have to go back to clarifying questions. And we might have to get back to reactions. And eventually, when you do a reaction round, you'll get to a point where people are saying, it's within my range of tolerance. That's where that language comes in. Or I agree. I agree with the proposal. And then you officially call for consent. And we often use thumbs for consent, thumbs down for objection, and we say no wavering. So there's no this. It's either up or down. And if you have something to say, you would object just as an opportunity to say it. And then once you've said it, you can change your objection or release your objections and the decision can be made. And so let's practice this. And
Rebecca,
so
do you mind before we start the practice, there are a couple of questions in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
From Eva and Danny.
Okay, so do you want to say it and then I will answer because otherwise it'll take me forever to read.
Sure. So Eva was saying the concept sounds very interesting and well thought out. So how are conflicts and problems addressed and resolved? And there are also special roles. What happens, for example, if someone is against certain decisions, or someone has a very long speaking times in the circles. I think the piece about the certain decisions and if someone is against them, we talked about it a little bit in the consent piece, but if you can speak to everything else.
Yeah, sure. So one of which is the facilitator has an important role of making sure that no one is dominating. So nobody is taking too long going on and on, is to sort of getting them to stick to, because quite often people will go on about personal preference again, and to try and bring them back to, go back to the aim, go back to the, how does this tie into the aim? And so that is really about, there's a lot of resources actually out there to train facilitators, because it is actually quite a skill set to facilitate, especially if you are dealing with a group of people that are not in agreement on things. As an organization, we actually have an appeals process in our governance. So if a circle makes a decision and somebody not in that circle doesn't agree with the decision, there's actually a process for them to go through, starting with being a guest at the circle's meeting and explaining why they have something and gaining more information, starting with that process. Because quite often what will happen is they'll object, they'll find out more information and then understand why that decision was made, and then they'll be fine. They just didn't understand why. And so we start there, and then work towards readdressing. But quite often it's happened once in 4 years of our organization. And it was something that, so that was sort of an interesting thing. Are there special roles? There's just the circle roles. Or there may be an operational role where somebody, again, has a specialty in something. So they might speak longer simply because they have more expertise and they're sharing that expertise, and that's allowed. I'm looking at the time, and I'm sorry that I'm going to go way over for people. I had originally thought 90 minutes, so I apologize. And if you need to jump off, feel free. Does that answer your questions? Okay. And Danny had said, I'm very curious how you identify diversity in the process without being tokenizing. Yeah, that's an actually very interesting thing, because we asked people when they put slates together to think about diversity. So we get them to think about it, but we don't, you can end up with a slate that isn't diverse. That can happen. Just because of who the people are in the room. And you're only dealing with 4 to 6 people in a circle, right? So you're not dealing with that many people. So it just becomes a matter of consciousness more than anything, and culture to avoid the tokenization is, and we become aware of, okay, well, there's only so many people in this category. We can't have that person be everywhere, do everything, like, again, avoiding that tokenization. So it is just more of an awareness. I don't think there's an easy way to say that. Conversation. Okay, I'm looking at the various things. Time is tight for practice. Can we shorten it? Yeah. Time is tight. I'm sorry. I really do want to practice this one in particular. And then the other one is evaluation, which comes at the end. And so at the end of every meeting, we will do an evaluation. We do a plus delta round at the end of every meeting that says what worked well and what might you change for next time is the delta. It's never negative language. We try to really avoid this didn't work, but keep it into a positive, maybe next time, pay more attention to the time. And then always a closing round, a checkout round. So just like we did a check-in, we do a checkout round. How are you leaving? I threw in the question, what's one thing you learned today, in the checkout round. So for those that need to leave, that's the end of the presentation. But for those that are willing to stick around, I'd like to do the decision-making process. Because I think that it would be fun. And it really does help solidify that understanding of how that works. Why is this everyone in meeting? There we go. So before we jump into this, is there anyone who has to leave who would like to do a quick checkout with us? Okay. Then let's jump into the practice decision making.
Rebecca,
Yeah.
I think Danny wrote something that maybe is hidden because it's a reply. I can read it out if that helps. She's saying, thank you for the response. For context, I struggle with this a little. As I sit on a charity board, I feel that the way they select board members is tokenizing. Establishing skills and knowledge, finance, education, law, we're set up on a skills matrix grid. And then once in a while they throw in, oh, and they're from this area of the world, or they're or their value. Like, I'm not sure exactly what she was responding to. Maybe that question she had earlier about tokenizing. She's here, so she could. I think still here, so she could.
I'm not trying to. I know that you're tight for time, Rebecca. I was just kind of providing context for my question about diversity. But it doesn't necessarily need a response. It was just a question I had because we say we want things to be diverse, but nobody really ever defines what that means and what it looks like and like whose diversity is represented in diversity, but who's like does it need to be visible diversity? So it was just sort of expanding on that. But I realized that you're trying to do this activity, so we can come back to it if there's time at the end.
Yeah, and diversity is contextual. So within our community, our diversity was about group A's and group B's. And what that was is when we built the community, we were selling 30 condos. 15 of them were reserved for families with people under 40. And that was done very specifically because in co-housing, it's really easy to get people in retirement age to buy a condo. People under 40, it's a lot harder for them to do it, and they have to wait till later in the process. And if we didn't reserve them, we would have sold the entire community to people that were retired, pretty much. And we wanted an intergenerational community. That's what we were selling. And so we had to go to the Canadian it's the national board for I can't read personal rights, the Human Rights Tribunal. That's it, the Human Rights Tribunal, because we were actually doing you can't sell housing legally. You can't discriminate based upon age. And what's interesting is the way we were doing it is actually considered reverse discrimination, because usually discrimination of age is discriminating against families, I think. I don't know. It turned out to be the opposite. And we actually got an exemption from that. We actually went out and had a legal exemption from the tribunal so that we could discriminate and say, hey, no, these units are reserved for families, so that we have an intergenerational community. Having done that, it has caused a dynamic within the community where we have people that identify as group A and people that identify as group B. And when we're trying to set up our circles and set up our decision-making authority, we suddenly are trying to use that age discrimination when we're doing it. So age discrimination became the key diversity element in our community. Our community is very diverse from an LGBTQ perspective. We are a fully welcoming community. But it's not tokenized that way. It's the tokenization actually comes based upon age, which is very interesting. And I think that's very contextual. And so the decision-making thing, the proposal I put forward was that imagine we are having lunch together. And so the proposal that I put together is that our lunch together be ham sandwiches. And so the first thing is, does anybody have any questions about that? clarifying questions?
Does anybody just jump in, or is there an order?
Usually there's an order. Usually there's two ways to do it. You can do it by hands, but typically you only do it by hands if you are an established circle that really know each other well. Otherwise, the facilitator would say, call on each person. So I would go like, Danny, Shahines.
Perfect.
Yeah, so let's do an order. And if I'm facilitating, I would call out the order. And
Can
then
I just go? I'm just
Yep.
gonna ask my question, and then I actually have to leave.
Okay.
So my clarifying question is, does anyone have any food restrictions like halal or vegetarian or gluten intolerance?
It's a great question.
I think actually, I'm not really sure if I understood this part. I mean, my clarifying question as part of the circle would probably be something like, is there something else to eat at that place we're going to? I don't know if the clarifying question is supposed to be by the people in the circles or if the facilitator is the one that's supposed to say that, because I'm imagining that Maha's question is probably said by the facilitator when they're saying their proposal.
So this is part of why I made a proposal that I knew was going to have these questions, because sometimes the proposal comes out. Sometimes a proposal is really well thought out. A lot of work has gone into it before it gets to the proposal stage. And so consent happens really quickly. But sometimes a proposal will just be thrown together to give us something to work with.
Okay.
And then we're coming out with, what are the questions? And so so Maha's asked Nadine, Danny, do you have any questions?
No, I have no questions.
Shahina's,
No, I don't have a question.
Eva?
I would probably ask if the meal is free or if we have to provide money to bring, yeah.
Cost, that's a great question. And so once the questions are out, then we can go into answering the questions. Well,
Can I also ask about time? Sorry.
Yep.
What time are we gonna eat?
Oh, yes. I said lunch, but
Culturally, I mean, lunch here is very
Yeah.
different times, but maybe it's
yeah.
12:01, basically.
Yeah. So for context, I put it together as imagine that we are in a work meeting, a circle meeting face-to-face together, over whatever the lunch hour is. So people are going to be hungry and we're going to order food in. What is that food going to be? And so there's some great questions. Does anybody have food restrictions? Well, I'm guessing that, I have to have gluten-free. I have celiac disease. Other food
I'm also
restrictions.
gluten-free, and I'm also gluten-free and I don't eat pork. So
Yeah. Is it full halal or just no
Yeah.
pork?
halal,
Hello. Okay.
but no
Did I
pork.
spell
Yeah.
that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Is
I
there
like-
any? Go ahead, Eva.
I like to eat vegan or at least vegetarian food.
Okay. And anybody else?
Not
Shahina?
salty, not salty.
Not salty. Okay. Danny, did you have anything?
I'm also vegetarian.
Okay, so we have that. So we now need to modify the proposal, right? Just based upon the clarifying questions, the proposal needs to be modified, because I now know that based upon these questions, this is not going to work. Right? This is a bad proposal. So if we went with our lunch together will be we could go with a vegan gluten-free salad. And so I've modified the proposal. And so now we can do, first of all, are there any other clarifying questions? Nadine? Eva?
Perhaps something like allergies. Is there someone who has allergies?
I think we caught that with the
Food
restrictions.
restrictions? Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How easy is it actually in real life to modify the proposal? We do it all the time. Yeah. Often a question comes up or a reaction comes up that causes us to modify the proposal. And that's part of why we do this process. Any questions? Any further questions? I'll just do this by hands at this point.
Can we answer the question of, is there something else to eat?
Oh, yes, that's a good question. The idea is that we would be ordering one thing for everybody. So we're trying to find one thing that everybody can eat.
What about the rest of the questions? Is it free, or do we have to pay for it?
And what time is it going to be? So it will be a meal that comes with at whatever our lunch break is, whatever that time is in our meeting. And it's included with the organization's paying for it. I'm not worried about those things. Again, just making this up as I go. But they're great questions and they're great. We call these dimensions sometimes, and they're really good things to think about when you're trying to make a decision. And then the next thing we're going to do is quick reactions. So now that we say our lunch is going to be a gluten-free salad with salt on the side. So I think I've now got a proposal that everybody might agree with. And so now what we do is we'll do a round and you can say whether you agree with it, whether it's within your range of tolerance, or whether you would make a different proposal, change the proposal in some way. This is your opinion time. So now you get to speak your opinion. So we'll go Nadine, Eva, Meha, Shani. Oh, I'm falling over it for you. Shainez and Danny.
Okay, my quick reaction is it's okay. It's fine. I agree, or however format. Who goes next?
Eva,
I also agree. Sounds nice.
Meha.
Sounds okay, but I wonder if all, you know how you can put all the vegetables separately so that if
So Maha did say that her internet will be on and off.
Yeah. So that's a great addition, right? Is rather than having everything together, have them sort of separately so that you can build your own. So I think that's a great idea, and I've added that to the proposal. Shahinas,
It's okay with me.
Danny?
I like the build your own edition. I would just also want to make sure that there is a protein ingredient, which is often left out of vegan food.
For example, chickpeas. Sort of throw that in there.
Although now
Okay.
I wonder, sorry, now I have another question.
Yeah.
Now I wonder if now that it's build your own, I wonder if it needs to be vegan and gluten-free, or if people can just choose the vegan and gluten-free ingredient.
That's a good question, but I think I would answer saying, yeah, it does, because of cross-contamination issues. As somebody who is very strictly gluten-free, the minute you add gluten, I can't participate in the thing because the risk of somebody using the same spoon in a serving dish or something like that gets too high. It's an interesting, yeah. So with that, we've all had a chance to sort of give a reaction. It's changed a little bit, but I think that with this proposal, as the facilitator, I believe that I can get full consent for it. So what I'm going to do is call for consent. And so now we'll do a roll call for consent. Do you consent to this proposal? And generally the options for answers are I consent, it's within my range of tolerance, which is also a consent. It's just a lower level of consent, or you object. Okay, so we'll do the same order. So Nadine, Eva, Meha, Shahinas, Danny.
It's within my range of tolerance.
Me too.
I consent.
Rebecca, Eva's asking a question in the chat. If she gets another idea, can she submit it a second time or can she only speak once?
It really depends on time.
Which we
And
are
the
now,
facility. Oh, sorry.
which we now don't have.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead,
And the
Eva.
and the facilitator makes sure that if there's time for another question or another quick reaction, right? Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah, you can keep doing it if it feels like the facilitator's trying to get to consent. And if they can get to consent, it's about making the good enough for now efficient conversation. But we can, you know, if there's time to do another round about how we can make it better, we can keep going on it. But if we have to quickly make a decision, then we're just working on consent. So Shahinas, do you consent?
Yeah, I'm consenting them.
Okay, and Danny?
I consent.
And I consent. So we have come to an agreement on a decision at this lunch. That's sort of how the process works for making decisions, right? There is a whole other process called oh, what's it called? I lost it. Where we actually set dimensions. It's sort of like it's a form of brainstorming, but it's done very specifically, in a very specific way, where you first of all ask all of the questions, answer any questions you can answer, and then come up with proposal pieces, and then try and build a proposal. It's a proposal building process. That's another process that's defined within SOFA's of sociocracy. And it works very well to get to a proposal that actually gets consent faster. And, you know, if we had all of the time in the world, we would sort of do that, but I want to end this session because we're getting close to the end. All right, maybe the end. So that's an example of how decision-making works in our meetings. Somebody makes a proposal and we go through, I'm going to try out the proposal. That's great. You might actually, if you're looking for a place to eat out, starting with the picture forming is what the other thing is called, but starting with the selection process, I would start with a selection process and then a proposal process, because then everybody can speak their first and second opinions and then do that. That actually works very well for that kind of decision making. So coming to the end, again, with every decision we make, often we'll get a safe enough to try comment. That's like, within my range of tolerance, safe enough to try. And then things will be evaluated. And so if not everybody's in strong agreement, then we'll shorten the term and evaluate it sooner. Quite often, what'll happen is the concerns will specifically be raised and we'll capture them so that when we do the evaluation, we know what we're looking for. Yes, I get it. And Dean's got to run very quickly. I'm also on the recordings end. I was just going to do, why don't we do a combined plus delta round and a checkout round? So what worked well, what didn't work, and how are you leaving? We'll just ask those questions. Nadine, Eva.
For the whole session or just the
For the whole
experience?
session.
Oh, okay. I really liked how we talked about, I mean, how you shared everything about sociocracy and the format and all of that. And I felt like it was very inclusive, which is not a very common thing with decision making, especially in contexts where there are formal settings or work settings. Yes, a lot of leaders and managers and, you know, community leaders are trying as hard as they can to be as inclusive as possible and take people's opinions and reactions and so on, but little happens to adjust beyond that point. It's like taking an opinion, you don't like it, tough, maybe we can talk about how you can be more okay with it, but it's not really changing of the proposal experience. So that's a very inclusive thing, and I love that. What might we change for next time? Maybe next time for this kind of session, we could have it for longer, not because that you went that you needed to take more time or anything, but actually I felt like there was so much that came out and of the experience of trying it out, and I would have loved to have that more in more areas of the experience, and maybe run through the whole thing to apply it in this group. Those are my thoughts. Thank you.
And how are you leaving?
I am leaving hungrier than I was because there was a lot of talk about food. And now I'm thinking about my food, like I have to go eat before my next session, which is also not the best thing to do right before you meditate, but whatever. That's what's happening today. So hungrier, but more enlightened. So I thank you for that.
Thank you. Eva?
I liked your lively presentation, and I liked the concept, and I thought about it all the time, how to apply it in my workplace. I liked the practical experience at the end very much, and I also would change the time frame because I really wanted to hear more and to do more practical work. But of course, in 1 hour you can't do that. So thank you very much. And what was the last thing?
How are you
again?
leaving?
I'm leaving inspired, and also I want to participate in this next session with Nadine. So I really have to grab some food. I'm leaving very happy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Shahinas?
And as I do, I appreciate attending this lecture and to know about this socio, I don't know, I have forgot, but nevertheless, I enjoyed it. And the most part which I have enjoyed, it's the last part, which is the practice. And leaving with thinking of how to apply it in my class. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And Danny?
I feel like I'm just gonna kind of echo what's already been said, but I thought what worked really well was sort of starting with the explanation and then walking through the practical example and actually going through the process where you get asked more questions. I think it actually worked well in a small group because we had space to do that. But I will agree that if we had a bit more time to see, it looks like you had a couple of other potential activities. It would have been neat to see sort of some of the other ways of approaching it. But I appreciate that you crammed a lot into a little amount of time. And I am leaving, the idea that sort of sticks with me the most is the idea of consent over consensus, or like the democratic vote, which feels like it's much more inclusive because then it's not majority rules or minority, you had a cool term for it, minority impedes, whatever that was.
Tyranny of the minority.
Tyranny, yeah. So that actually, I just ran a session yesterday where we had to do a vote, and we came to, I guess, the consensus, but I feel like this would be a much better way to approach it. So I'm going to rethink how I run some of my communities of practice where we have to make decisions. And a lot of times just people like looking at you on the Zoom screen. So this sounds like a much better way to do it. So thank you.
Thank you. And for me, it worked well that it was a small group. I had designed it for a much larger group with breakouts. Wished I had more time. I think I had originally put 90 minutes, and that's part of, it's like, how do I, but this is the first time I'm building this kind of workshop. So I now know that actually I could do a 2-hour workshop with real breakouts and add picture forming, which is the thing that we didn't get to that I think is also very interesting. And that's related to how to build the proposals. And so there's a lot of great resources in the document. If you look at the Many Voices One Songbook, I will have to find it. I have to put it somewhere and then I can give it to you. It's actually CC BY. So they've actually said that you can share it. You don't have to buy it. I have an e-copy of it, so I can give a link for the electronic copy of it. That is how it is licensed. Which is really cool because it actually goes through a lot of those things in detail. So if you want to see more detail about how they do it at SOFA, you can. And I'm leaving energized and inspired and ready to build more of my semester. I'm working on my courses for next semester because we are transitioning from Blackboard to Canvas, which is an exciting transition. And that's it. And we can stop recording.